Hi everybody, welcome back to our channel. Apologies in advance, I've had a cold for the last week, so my voice is sounding lovely and husky, but I really wanted to get this story to you because the sentencing's just come in. So here we go. At 7:39 p.m. on Sunday the 30th of June 2024, Daniel Paduchowski called 911 to report that his wife had not returned from her run. Officers arrived to the home a few minutes later and took Daniel's statement. They heard that his wife, Kelly Paduchowski, had told her husband she was going to Lake Mary for a run. She left at around 1:30 p.m. and he had not heard from her since. She had never been late coming home before. Flagstaff is a vibrant city nestled in the mountains of northern Arizona. It's known for its stunning natural beauty and rich cultural heritage. It's located right by the San Francisco Peaks, which gives it a great mix of outdoor adventures with activities like hiking, skiing, and stargazing, as well as a charming downtown area filled with historic buildings and local eateries. Kelly grew up in the area alongside her twin sister Lindsay. She was known as a patient, kind, and considerate person. She enjoyed making pottery and she loved the outdoors, especially hiking and running. She shared these passions with her two children, who were 7 and 9 years old when she went missing. Kelly and Daniel lived in a comfortable home in the Coconino Estates. According to Daniel's LinkedIn profile, he worked as an architect, while Kelly was a solar panel specialist. As part of her job, she gave talks at schools teaching kids the science behind solar power. When the weather was good, Kelly would head out for a run around Lake Mary, which is southeast of Flagstaff and just a short drive from their home. She was training for her first triathlon, and when the weather was nice, she would also swim at the lake. Daniel told the responding officers that night that they had both gone for a bike ride earlier in the day at the Schultz Creek Trail. When they got home, she decided to squeeze in a training run and had left for Lake Mary at around 1:30 p.m. He had become concerned when she didn't come home on time and when he couldn't get hold of her on her cell phone. By Monday morning, more than 50 search and rescue members, as well as 60 volunteers from the local area, were carrying out a ground search on foot and by bike. Meanwhile, a helicopter surveyed the Lake Mary area from above. Because the terrain in this area is so mountainous and steep, the search efforts were extremely slow-moving and exhausting for volunteers. Officials had attempted to use thermal search technology in the most rugged areas, but because it was summertime in Phoenix, the intense summer heat meant that the scanners only worked in the very early morning hours before the sun comes up and heats the earth. As the search got underway, investigators requested Kelly's phone records. They found that her phone had been in the area of the Schultz Creek Trail at around 10:20 a.m. on the day she went missing. Eyewitness reports put Daniel in the same area at around 11:30 a.m. This timeline corroborated Daniel's story that they had gone for a bike ride together. By 12:13 p.m., Kelly's phone was pinging from the towers around her home. That's what they expected. But strangely, there was no data to indicate Kelly's phone had left the area that day, even though Daniel said Kelly always took her phone with her when she ran. Meanwhile, investigators canvassed the couple's neighbours to see if they could offer any insight into Kelly's disappearance. Almost immediately, they discovered that the Paduchowskis' marriage wasn't as perfect as Daniel would have them believe. Neighbours spoke about how they often heard the couple fighting. On the day of Kelly's disappearance, one neighbour heard a scream coming from their home. Another shared how they had seen Kelly lying face down on the ground in the backyard, and Daniel was on top of her with his hands on her shoulders. Later on that day, he saw Kelly lying motionless on her side in the same area. 5 minutes later, she was gone. At the same time, the neighbour watched Daniel use a hose to clean the area where she had been lying on the ground. None of these neighbours called 911 to report what they had seen. While officers took statements from neighbours, family members of Kelly made a surprising discovery. They found her white Mazda CX-5 parked on the other side of town at the Campbell Mesa trailhead, nowhere near where she would have entered the park for a run around Lake Mary. When investigators looked at CCTV footage from that area, they found that the CX-5 had arrived at around 1:30 p.m. on the day of Kelly's disappearance. But it wasn't being driven by her. It was Daniel behind the wheel. It was becoming clear that Daniel's story was exactly that, a story, not founded in truth or facts. A search warrant was issued for the Paduchowski home just one day after Kelly was reported missing. When forensic investigators examined the home, they found fresh blood on the ground outside the garage and on the ground where Daniel had hosed it clean. They also found a bloody footprint on the patio of the home, and inside a trash can they found a grey shirt, pants and a hat that belonged to Kelly. Daniel was immediately charged with aggravated assault for the incident the neighbours had witnessed. His arrest enabled law enforcement to keep him in custody while they established whether the altercation between the couple had anything to do with Kelly's disappearance. Officials held a press conference that afternoon and announced that Kelly's disappearance was being treated as a homicide, not a missing persons case. During Daniel's initial police interview, officers noticed that he had fresh injuries on his hands and on one of his knees. When he was asked to explain the blood which had been found at his home and the fight which had led to Kelly being seen motionless on the ground, he refused to answer any questions. All he said was that he wanted a lawyer. However, without realizing, he did let one critical piece of information slip. When he was asked about his relationship with Kelly, he said she was a beautiful woman, referring to her in the past tense. Remember, this was less than 3 days after she went missing. Daniel's comment cemented the belief that Kelly was dead and not missing. Searchers continued to look for her, but the investigators turned their full attention to Daniel. They hoped that he would tell them what had actually happened to Kelly that day and where he had left her. Their efforts paid off. At 10 a.m. on Friday the 5th of July, less than a week after Daniel reported Kelly missing, he led investigators to the site where he had dumped his wife's body. Kelly's remains were found off of Hart Prairie and Northern Highway 180. This area is several miles away from where the search had been focused. But Daniel didn't give up his secrets out of the goodness of his heart or to spare his children any further pain. He only revealed the location where he had dumped his wife's body in exchange for a plea deal, which of course gave him a shorter sentence. The plea agreement meant Daniel would plead guilty to second-degree murder, tampering with physical evidence, concealment of a body, and possession of drugs. He was due to be sentenced in September 2024 and was facing up to 16 years in prison. If he'd been charged with first-degree murder, he would have been facing a life sentence. Due to several motions put before the court, the sentencing was delayed by a month. It went ahead on the 15th of October 2024. During the hearing, Kelly's family were given the opportunity to provide victim impact statements. They called Daniel a horrible person who was skilled at manipulating others. They said that Kelly had been wanting to divorce Daniel for many years, but she never seemed to be able to get away from him. They believe that when she finally got the courage to end things for good, Daniel reacted by ending her life. Throughout the hearing, Daniel cried and wiped his eyes. When he was given the opportunity to speak, he told the judge he was not a violent person and that Kelly's death was the result of a moment of weakness. As part of his plea agreement, Daniel was sentenced to 16 years in prison for murder. Kelly's family responded, quote, "Daniel deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison, though we will have to settle for his 16-year sentence." End quote. As part of the deal, Daniel also agreed to take the authorities to several other locations where they were able to recover Kelly's cell phone, her car keys, and the weapon Daniel had used to take her life. That weapon has never been disclosed. Authorities have also not revealed Kelly's cause of death or Daniel's motive for killing her. After Kelly's body was recovered, her twin sister Lindsay established a GoFundMe to support ongoing cost for Kelly's children. I'll link that in the description box below. The children are now in the custody of Lindsay and her husband. Because Daniel accepted a plea deal, it's unlikely we'll ever know much more detail about Kelly's murder. But in so many cases these days, police records are requested by media organisations and that information ends up being made public, which is why Kelly's mother, Mary McFall, filed a court motion to prevent the Flagstaff Police Department from being able to publicly share any evidence related to this case. In August 2024, she asked for all of the evidence to be sealed by the court. She did this after several media outlets requested that the FPD release all of the body cam footage, autopsy reports, and interview footage of Daniel, which had been collected as part of the investigation. In the court filing, the APD noted that they had collected a considerable amount of evidence in this case. A significant portion of that evidence is digital, like CCTV footage, phone records, and interview footage. The Arizona Police Department supported Mary's view that the evidence should be sealed. They also provided some insight into what evidence had been collected in the case and the amount of effort which would be needed to release those records to the media. They detailed that there were approximately 1,429 separate items of evidence. This includes 1,093 photos, 16 audio recordings, which include 911 calls and interviews with Kelly's family and other witnesses, 4 recorded jail phone calls, 54 miscellaneous documents, which don't include the written police reports, videos of interviews with Daniel, which total over 40 hours of footage, and interviews with Kelly's children, which include more than 10 hours of footage. There are also 15 separate body camera videos, which total 1.5 hours of footage, dash cam video from a citizen, which is 6 minutes long, footage from 165 ring door cameras, which total over 9 hours of footage, 11 surveillance videos from businesses, which are over 21 hours of footage, and 13 minutes of drone footage. And on top of all of that, there are also 24 separate written police reports with a total of 146 pages. Since the time the case went public until Kelly's mum filed this motion to seal the case, the APD had received 10 requests for the release of this evidence. If you're unfamiliar with the process of this information being released, it's not as easy as just sending over the files. Every single piece of evidence needs to be reviewed by an officer to redact anything which needs to be removed. This might include details like the names of children, personal addresses, witness names, or anything that shouldn't be released to the public. The motion stated that most of the requests had asked for the records related to the APD investigation, but some of those media requests also included requests for more of the jail phone calls, as well as video of Daniel being booked into jail, and that would have been recorded by the jail system, not the APD. The APD told the court that when they receive a request from the media, they will explain to the requesters how much time it takes to go through each individual piece of evidence and appropriately redact visual or audio data. Alternatively, they also offer to provide all of the files fully redacted, which kind of seems to defeat the point of them asking for the evidence in the first place. Given how much evidence there is in this case, it's clear that going through every piece of evidence, including all that body cam, all the CCTV, interviews, etc., is like kind of a massive deal and would be a considerable use of police resources just so that the media can get their story. And on top of that, the APD also had to take into account that Kelly's mum had requested that the evidence not be released to the news outlets at all. The APD told the court that when they had advised the news outlets about how much it would cost to go through and review every piece of evidence, the news outlets rescinded their requests. It's interesting to note that there is currently no law which governs what police departments can and cannot share when it comes to body cam footage. It seems that it is entirely up to each individual police department what they decide to release. Some might argue that the evidence falls under the laws related to public records. This law gives police departments the authority to decline to release evidence, but only if there is a valid reason to do so. More and more, we are seeing body cam footage being released almost immediately after an incident, especially in cases which are controversial or where the police have shot someone. Many of these clips only have a little bit of blurring over victims, and some have none at all. When it comes to this case, the APD said that some of the videos they recorded show Daniel leading the officers to the dead body of his wife and him describing in detail what he did, and they don't want that information made public. There are also interviews with the couple's children, which would need significant redactions. Even then, the police department said they would not release the interviews with children unless there was a court order which required them to do so. Basically, the APD requested that the court order that none of the videos or photos of Kelly's body should ever be released, and neither should any information about how she was killed or the weapon that Daniel used to kill her. Here's why Mary's court filing is relevant to true crime. There are two sides, and sometimes three, to every argument. There is clearly public interest in this case. If you're watching this video, you're proof of that. But we must also consider the rights of the victim and her family to privacy, especially when there are children involved. Kelly's mum filed this motion because she believes that her grandchildren should never be able to go online and see any of the evidence collected in the case. She was concerned that the interview with Daniel or the video of him showing officers where his wife's body could be replayed over and over on the news and in reruns of true crime stories. Those endless replays would be accessible to Kelly's children, and they would be able to see their father talking about the death of their mother. I can actually see where Mary's coming from, but on the other side, I do wonder whether hiding everything just leaves people to fill in the blanks themselves. Is misinformation worse than too much information? I don't know. What do you think? I don't see any need for the interviews with Kelly's children or videos of her body to be released. That doesn't serve any purpose other than some kind of sick entertainment. But sharing Daniel's interviews might offer some insight into his mind or his thought process. There's always something to be learned from a case like this. What was going on behind closed doors? What red flags were there that Kelly was in danger from the person she most likely trusted? How can we use this information to protect others from the same thing? In this case, the court had to decide whether the privacy of the victims outweighed the public's right to know, or the media's desire to have the video put on the news or to make a true crime story. The APD asked that the court consider the victims' families' position. They know their family and what it is like to live in a small town. They argued that the privacy interests of the victims in this matter outweigh the public's right to know the details of the investigation. They even referred to the Arizona Victims' Bill of Rights, which are a part of the Arizona Constitution, and therefore constitutional rights. Among some of those rights are the right to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity, and to be free from intimidation, harassment, or abuse throughout the criminal justice process. It probably won't come as a surprise that a whole bunch of news publications banded together to object to Mary's motion to seal the evidence. They argued that the media's right to public records overrules Mary's rights as a victim of a crime, and they said all of the records should be released to them. They promised not to release any autopsy photos or videos of Kelly's body because doing so would violate an Arizona law which prevents publication of these types of images, but they said everything else should be fair game. They also said that sealing the evidence would violate the media's First Amendment rights for the release of public records. Sadly, by the time I'm recording this, the ruling has not come in this case, and the hearing which will determine whether the records are sealed has been set for later in 2024. Mary's court motion raises some important questions about true crime coverage. I would argue that most true crime creators have good intentions when it comes to covering the cases they choose for their channels. I personally share cases which hold some interest to me from a social justice lens. That might be because of the perpetrator's background or how a victim or their family was treated after a crime has been committed, or cases when there were so many ignored warnings which we could learn from, or even the injustice which led to the victim being targeted in the first place. My intention is to share those aspects of the cases in order to better understand the human condition. But even with good intentions, there can still be bad outcomes, even unintentionally, like re-traumatizing the family and loved ones of a victim, or not being privy to critical information, which means we present the case without the fullness of the evidence. It's something I'm very mindful and considerate of. There is no world in which I find true crime a form of entertainment rather than a source of learning or understanding. But at worst, true crime creators could be negligent, especially when they present the case without all the facts, or use their storytelling to exacerbate harmful stereotypes or prejudice. There's no doubt it's a fine line we walk, and some do it better than others. But if a victim's family explicitly states that they don't want their case covered in the news or in any other format, should that overrule public interest? It's an important question and one I'd love to hear your opinion on. I'd also love to hear which true crime creators you trust and respect for the way in which they present their cases. There's always more to learn. Thanks for joining me, and sorry about the husky voice.